All right, on this next installment of the 347 build, I think we left off with the heads. I went ahead and ordered Trick Flow 7.2. These are brand new out of the box. Here we go. Come on, focus. There we go. Trick Flow 7.2 O80 rods. These are right here installed, and they're exactly what I need for 11R heads. And when I looked up, I used my rod length checker, and this is the tool that you're gonna have to buy. But I used this as a Trick Flow piece as well, and I got my rod length, and it came out to about 7.185. I measured like 3 million times. I had my wife come in and check me too, because I used a caliper, and I used a couple of mic devices to mic that rod. So I knew I needed 7.185, and I upgraded, or I went up just a little bit, went up to the 7.200. This is the $99 one from their chromoly. They're meant to use with guide plates. All Trick Flow stuff. I've stuck with Trick Flow because, one, they're really affordable. If you go down to the cheaper stuff, and it's either, they make these with the welded on ball ends and other things, you can cheapen out on any of this stuff. But these are chromoly. I know they're going to give me a lot of service. I had chromolys in this engine the last time on the 302. It ran for 15 years with the chromoly push rods from Trick Flow, and they still had the bluing, like you blew a gun. I don't know what you call what they put on here, but it's almost like a bluing that you use on a pistol, and it still had just a little bit rubbed off where it sat in the guide plate, but just barely, and I couldn't put my fingernail in it. So these things lasted for over a decade and ran pretty hard, rubbing it out and stuff. So really happy with the Trick Flow stuff. I think you should stick to a name brand, and with the Trick Flow heads, pack valve springs. These are dual valve springs, and they're steel retainers. I didn't go with titanium because I just think that's kind of overkill for what I'm doing. If you like them, go ahead and use them. And then Trick Flow 190cc heads, and pretty much my whole drivetrain is going to be Trick Flow. And then these are Ford Performance lifters from my last video. I went ahead and this is the tray from the stock motor. I scrubbed it down with hot water, soapy water, and then I used a degreaser on it, and then you can see I polished it out with steel wool. Real smooth, no grime or anything on there. That tray is then bolted in, and then I checked one thing: check your clearances on your bolts, because once you put these back in, if you have, I didn't see that it would interfere with the cam, but you can see your cam is sitting right here in this valley. So I wanted to make sure these bolts, I ran this around 360 twice, and just to make sure that there was no interference. I could feel anything catching on these bolts. If you're using aftermarket bolts or bolts that are not from the stock 302, you could run into interference. Every step of the way when you're building your motor, make sure that you're checking along the way every little thing that you add onto the motor, and make sure it's pristine and clean as you can get it. There's no problem with using used parts. The dog bone and tray are used. These lifters were used on my previous motor. They all checked all out, no wear marks or anything. So I reused lifters, and I made sure as I put them in the bore they were smooth. And so as I get and build, checking clearances on everything. And I think I covered in the last video the bolts. Try to finger tighten them first so you don't have any catching before you go torquing them down with your hand drill just to get them snug. My heads aren't torqued yet. They do have the Felpro. I don't remember the series, but they're the Felpro with the blue lining and the steel rings on the head gasket. But I didn't run them, so you can pull these heads and still keep the Felpro, and you wouldn't have to replace those. But where I'm at now is I'm checking my piston to valve clearance, and a lot of guys would throw some Play-Doh in there, run it through, and then they would find that. But I'm going to add to this video. I have an inspection camera that has a memory stick in it, and it's one of the higher end ones that has the ability to have memory in it. I'm going to pop that memory stick out, add it to this video, and show you, the clearances that I've had once I got into the intake and checked the valve movement and where it was hitting the piston. You can actually see it in the video, and then the exhaust side as well. Ran the video camera down into that and down into here, and then I pulled the springs. And real quick tip: get one of these $10 spring removers. Cheapest thing you can buy, and it's the easiest tool to use. It's not fancy. It's not a C-clamp. It's it's not overly priced. It was $10, and I got it on my favorite store right here, Summit. So I bought this, and I bought this when I bought the 7.2 push rods. So then I popped off my 2 valve springs, and then I not mic'd them, but I checked them for valve clearance with the dial here, the dial indicator. And so I have the little dial set at 0. Let's see if I can zoom in here. All right, so I've got the little dial set at 0, and I've got this zeroed out. You can't, if I get right on it, it's right there. All right, so as I move the valve up and down, I could see in here that the valve is actually sitting down into the piston where the valve release have been cut for these trick flow heads. Making all your parts work together, I mean, that's the hardest part of getting this all together. And then as I move it out, you can see it's at 0. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, and some change before it stops. So if I back it down here, I know I'm getting at least, right there. I mean, you can see the play on this thing. It's huge. I've got tons of room to move these valves up and down. So there you go. More than 4 thousandths lift there. 400 thousandths, excuse me. So it'd be 0.400. Plenty of room. And then, of course, it runs back down to 0 after you zero it out. So just make sure your piston to valve clearance is good. Using some Play-Doh and then pulling your heads can do the same thing. But I know I've got plenty of play on that valve, and that's with the piston at top dead center, TDC on number 1. I forgot to mention that. That piston's all the way up. So even all the way up, I've got 400 thousandths to play with there. My cam pushes out 543 with the 1.6 rocker. I believe it's 543. I have to check on that. It's the stage 2 cam. It's installed in here already, and that with the duration. I've got some checker springs coming. Again, I got to put a checker spring in there and run the whole system through with my lifters on there, so that when I run it through, I'm just going to have these 2 lifters on. The rest of these will stay the springs up and closed. And so with my checker springs on there and my lifters installed, I can get an accurate measurement of piston to valve clearance. I can feel if there's anything catching in there, and then I can watch it with my dial indicator and see if there's any piston to valve contact. And again, while I'm doing that, I can watch it here. These heads are so cavernous in here. I can literally watch it in there and here, and then in the spark plug hole. So I'm going to check this thing thoroughly. No matter how you do it, there's so many ways to do this. There's really no wrong way as long as you're paying attention to your build. I'm really excited to be able to give you a few tips that I picked up along the way, and that I've learned from you guys on YouTube, and excellent engine builders. Again, this is just my second engine build, and every step of the way, you're just watching. You're being meticulous about every little build, keeping the engine clean, and making sure your clearances on anything that you bolt onto this motor are not interfering with any of the parts that are in the rotating assembly. Thanks for watching. This is the end of where I'm at right now. I will be cleaning this up, putting this all back together once I check my piston to valve clearance. I'll torque my heads, install all of my rockers, and set up my lash and set up the rocker to be centered on the valve, and as well as to the left or right, and then just screwing down the rocker stud. Once I've got that done and everything, I'll finally be able to button this up, and I'm going to use Felpro's intake gaskets, and then I've got this thing going on here. I think this is the first time I pulled this out. It's going to look something like this. The next video, what I'm going to have to do with this intake manifold, you can see I'm trying to get the holes lined up here. It's about right there. And I'm going to have to, I'm going to run some colored dye. It's just going to be colored RTV around the edges, and then go back and stick this down on it, bring it back off, wipe all the RTV off the heads, and then go back and look at this thing, and wherever the RTV hole is not colored, or I mean, again, there's several ways to do that. I'm going to mark that out with an X-Acto knife, or I've got actually just recently bought a set of screwdrivers that have a pick on it, and I'll just pick off the intake, and then once I get the intake off, I'll go back and clean up the edges, and that will match the intake to the heads. Very easy stuff. You know, as if I can do this stuff, anybody can. Again, meticulous cleanliness and step by step, making sure all your clearances are good, and checking against, you know, forums, check against the build books, check against the Ford enthusiast sites, and just go step by step and make sure that you're, you know, counting all of your ducks and keeping them in a row. And then I've got an EFI going on top of this. It's the Phytech Go EFI 4. It's the 600 horsepower EFI carb style throttle body injected setup, and it's all self-contained. All I got is a power wire. Run the wires to the Dizzy, the distributor, and then the distributor gets its power from. I'm actually going to use the coil from a Ford Mustang with a plug that I bought from American Muscle, and that plug is sitting over here. So I've got some parts and stuff that I picked up over the last couple weeks that this will allow me to use my distributor that I locked out, and using a Ford 90 to 93 TFI parts to assemble everything, and then have it all self-contained and ran off the EFI. So I'll be able to control with a computer. I have a little control box, and it's a touchscreen. I'll be able to control timing. I'll be able to control fuel injection. It's self-learning, so it'll start building my fuel curves with me as soon as I get it fired up. And there's just so much more that EFI system does. So this is not a carbureted motor. This is actually an EFI system. So I'm using a single plane intake because that's the 347s Ford Performance used. This is the Victor Jr. copy that was built for Ford. This is Ford Motorsport version of it. It looks just like the Victor Jr., but it has Ford casting numbers in it back here. Ford Motorsport's on here, and the casting is just as good a quality as the Victor Jr., but it's, I think, $80 cheaper. I just was blown away that Ford can offer this intake for your engine, and you can still get it way cheaper than a Victor Jr. You're still getting the quality and the machining and the made in the USA, you know, proudly made in the USA parts. So that's what I'm trying to stick to as much as possible with this motor. Outside of the EFI system is, I think, made in China, but Phytech is an American company, and so is Performance Products, which is my distributor that I have locked out. It's a really nice distributor. But once I get into the videos, I'll go, come back later and hit those things. Thanks for watching. Subscribe and, like my pages. Thanks.